He wasn't born into brilliance. He wasn't born into madness either. He was just a boy, small and restless, with eyes that looked too far into the distance. While others found comfort in games, in the closeness of their homes, he would step out into the night and wait for the sky to say something back. And in time, it did. The first whisper came softly, not like a voice in the ear, not like a dream, but something in between. A faint stirring that carried through the stillness of a summer dusk. He was 10 years old, his shoes were too big, his knees were scraped from falling too often, and he held his breath as if the entire world were leaning toward him. The clouds shifted, their edges glowing with the faintest silver, and the boy swore he heard them murmur. Not words, not really, but something that felt like belonging. It's strange, isn't it, the way children notice things the rest of us forget. The hum of wires at night, the sigh of trees, the way silence itself carries a heartbeat. Rick, before he was anyone, before anyone called him a genius, before anyone thought to call him broken, was simply a boy who felt the universe breathe. And that night, under a sky that never blinked, he thought, I'm not alone. No one believed him, of course. He tried once at breakfast to explain it. His mother laughed lightly, wiping her hands on a towel, saying, Dreams, Ricky. You've always been a dreamer. His father only grunted, busy with tools and work, and so he stopped talking about it. But inside, the whisper grew roots. Each evening he wandered back outside, pretending to look for fireflies, pretending to kick at stones when really he was listening. Sometimes he waited an hour before anything stirred, sometimes nothing came at all, and he'd return to bed with heavy eyelids, feeling the disappointment of silence. But when the sky did answer, oh, how his chest lifted. The whispers were never commands, never secrets, only currents of feeling brushing against him like wind. He thought they sounded lonely. He thought they needed someone to hear them. So he listened. As the weeks passed, he began to notice other patterns. The way the stars seemed to breathe in rhythms. The way shadows stretched not just with the sun, but with something deeper, like hidden tides. He kept a notebook, not with words, but with doodles, circles upon circles, shapes like raindrops falling sideways. He didn't show it to anyone. It wasn't for showing. It was his way of remembering. And in his remembering, something happened. One night, lying flat on the grass, he whispered back. Just a single sound, a small exhale shaped into a syllable he didn't recognize. And the sky stirred. For the first time, the silence moved because of him. It was like tossing a pebble into a vast ocean and seeing ripples that never stopped. He gasped and covered his mouth, afraid someone would hear. But no one did. Only the stars. Only the clouds, only the quiet. It was then he decided, not in words, not in thought, but in the gentle certainty children sometimes have, that he would keep this secret. Not to hide it, but to protect it. If grown-ups couldn't understand a whisper, why hand them a chorus? No, he would guard it. He would grow with it. And perhaps one day he would know what it meant. In those early years, he was still clumsy. He broke more toys than he fixed, more jars than he opened. His laughter was quick, his anger quicker, but beneath it all was that listening, that patience, that strange, quiet hope that somewhere in the folds of the universe, something was aware of him, not watching, not judging, just aware. And that was enough. He began to talk to the whispers in his own way. Not with full sentences, not even with questions, but with offerings. He left small things under the stars, a marble, a feather, a piece of bread. He once set down his broken slingshot, whispering, You can have it." When he returned in the morning, it was still there, dew-covered. He smiled anyway. The point was not that they took. The point was that he gave. At school, he was restless. Teachers called his name twice before he noticed. His friends teased him for daydreaming. He didn't mind. Because in his mind, the classroom walls bent into skies. He would draw portals on the edges of notebooks. He didn't yet know what a portal was, but he drew them anyway. He thought of them as doors for whispers, places for voices too tired to travel. One afternoon, when the sun lay golden over the grass, he asked the clouds, not aloud but inwardly, "Why me?" And the air grew heavy. The light dimmed just a little, and though no words formed, he understood. Because you're listening. That answer followed him for years. Through sleepless nights, through awkward laughter, through the fumbling beginnings of invention, he held on to it like a lullaby. Because you're listening. It made him feel chosen, but not in a grand way, not like a hero. More like a child trusted with a fragile secret, a lantern meant to be carried carefully. And sometimes, when he lay in bed, unable to sleep, he thought he heard the whispers in the walls too. Not just outside, not just in the sky. As if they had followed him in, curling like smoke around his pillow. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he let the sound rock him to sleep, as gentle as a mother humming behind a door. It was on the last night of that summer when he heard the clearest whisper yet. He was alone in the field, fireflies blinking in lazy arcs. The stars hung low, full of patience. He closed his eyes and breathed. Then softly, as though it had waited for years, the sky sighed into him. "We remember you." The boy shivered. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't know if it was a promise, a warning, or a simple comfort. But it felt true in the way some dreams feel truer than waking. He whispered back, trembling, "I'll remember you too." And in that quiet vow, something settled. Not destiny, not prophecy, but a thread, invisible, unbreakable, weaving his small life into something vast. He didn't know what it would mean. He didn't need to. For that night, for that boy, it was enough simply to belong. The grass bent around him, the wind exhaled, the whispers faded into the kind of silence that carries warmth. He closed his eyes, smiling faintly, already drifting into sleep. And though he would one day build machines and break worlds, for now he was only a child listening to the sky. The whispers did not follow him everywhere. They lived outside, where the sky stretched wide, where clouds turned into drifting pages of a book only he could read. But inside, within the small wooden house that smelled of bread and tools and laundry, hung too close to dry, there was only the hush of ordinary life. It was not a bad home. It was not unkind. It was simply too small. The walls pressed in with a familiarity that dulled him. The kitchen table was scratched. The clock ticked too loudly, and every night the same radio programs hummed with voices that meant nothing to him. His father's hands were always busy, oil and splinters marking his skin, his patience short but never cruel. His mother hummed softly when she thought no one was listening, her voice drifting like the steam from soup. And Rick, still just a boy, sat at the window, chin resting on the sill, staring at the horizon as though waiting for something that refused to arrive. He didn't dislike his parents. He didn't dislike the house. He only felt misplaced. As if he had been given a box too small for the thoughts that grew inside him. In school it was no different. The desks lined up like cages, the chalk squeaking like a nervous bird. Teachers spoke of numbers, dates, rules, things that seemed shallow compared to the quiet pulse of the stars. He would doodle instead, spirals, loops, strange symbols no one else could understand. When caught, he'd quickly erase them, but the faint impressions remained, ghost marks in the paper, like whispers stubbornly refusing to leave. It wasn't that he was misunderstood. It was that he didn't expect to be understood. That realization settled early like an anchor, like a kind of acceptance. And yet, even in that acceptance, there was longing. Sometimes, on long afternoons when the light slanted just right through the window, he would lie on the floor and imagine the house stretching outward, each wall bending, folding, opening into endless corridors. The kitchen would lead to forests, the attic to stars. He'd imagine opening a closet and finding another world, not because he read about such things, but because it felt possible. He felt certain that doors existed where no one else dared to look. He even tried once. He took apart the door to his room, carefully unscrewing it, convinced that hidden between the hinges there might be a secret. When his father found him, the man only sighed and muttered something about wasting time. Rick didn't argue. He never argued back then. He simply put the door together again, slower than before, whispering to himself, maybe next time. His mother, though, was different. She noticed the faraway look in his eyes. Sometimes she would place a hand on his shoulder and say softly, "Your mind is always somewhere else, Ricky." And though he didn't answer, he felt grateful that at least someone saw the distance. Even if she didn't follow him there, she saw the direction he was facing. At night, lying in bed, the house creaked around him. Pipes rattled, floorboards groaned. To anyone else, they were ordinary sounds of settling wood and shifting air. But to him they were half whispers, muted echoes of the voices outside. He would press his ear against the wall and pretend it was the heartbeat of something vast, something caged in plaster. The house was too small, yes, but he made it larger in his imagination. He imagined the attic leading to tunnels, the basement to caverns. He pictured every drawer as a potential portal. Even the radio, and which bored him with endless chatter. He sometimes twisted to strange static, letting the white noise shape itself into phrases, into laughter, into the possibility of voices too quiet to belong to the human world. The truth is, loneliness does not always come from cruelty or neglect. Sometimes it comes simply from knowing that your heart is tuned to a frequency no one else seems to hear. Rick felt this long before he had the words for it. He was not unloved, he was simply unmatched. And so he carried his secret companionship with the sky, guarding it like a flame. There was one moment, small, almost forgettable, that he remembered for years. He was sitting in the kitchen, turning a spoon over and over, watching the reflection warp his face. His mother asked him what he was doing. He told her, "I'm trying to see the me that doesn't exist." She smiled faintly, distracted, and said, "That's just your reflection, honey." He wanted to tell her that wasn't what he meant. He wanted to tell her about the whispers, about the doors, about the way the world felt layered. But instead he just nodded and went quiet. Sometimes when we are young, silence is our safest language. And so the house, with all its closeness, with all its warmth and weariness, became both shelter and cage. Rick loved it in the way one loves a familiar melody, but always, always, he longed for the spaces between the notes. On the nights when the walls felt smallest, he would slip outside barefoot, the earth cool beneath his toes. The field waited, the sky waited, and the whispers came again. They never mocked him, never dismissed him, never grew impatient. They simply were. And in their being, he felt larger. He didn't yet know who he would become. He didn't yet know that his longing would turn into invention, his listening into creation. All he knew in those days was that the world inside his home could never contain the world inside his heart. The house was too small, but the sky was endless, and in that endlessness he began to grow. It was late afternoon when the first answer came. Not the faint murmurs he had grown used to, not the soft impressions of presence, but something clearer. The sky was swollen with clouds that day, piled high and slow-moving, their shadows drifting lazily across the fields. Rick lay on his back in the grass, arms folded behind his head, waiting the way he always did. His shoes were kicked off, his hair was tangled, and the smell of earth clung to him. He asked, not aloud, but inside himself, "Are you still there?" The clouds shifted. A breeze moved through the tall grass, bending it as though bowing. And though no sound touched his ears, he felt a reply, simple and steady. Yes. He sat up quickly, heart thudding. It wasn't imagination, at least it didn't feel like imagination. He had felt whispers before, the vague hum of something watching, but this was different. This was a conversation. Children rarely know how extraordinary their own discoveries are. For Rick it wasn't proof of magic, nor even a miracle, it was just what the world was like. He accepted it the way one accepts that rivers flow or birds sing. He didn't think of explaining it. He didn't think of questioning. He only smiled and lay back down again, staring into the slow-moving sky. The next time he asked, he was braver. Why me? He thought. The clouds swirled, forming a long stretch of brightness against the grey. The grass trembled, though no storm approached. And again, without sound, without words, the feeling came. Because you listen. It was the same answer he would hear again, years later. The same truth that shaped him. At the time, he only nodded faintly, as though someone had reminded him of something he already knew. From then on, the clouds became his teachers. Not in the way adults taught lessons, not with rules and chalk and stern reminders, but in silence, in patience, in slowness. He learned that the sky never hurried. He learned that waiting was not empty time, but a kind of listening. He learned that sometimes the best questions are the ones left unanswered. He also learned that answers could be strange. Once, he asked if the clouds were alive. The reply that touched him was neither yes nor no, but something in between. Alive enough to remember. He did not know what that meant. He didn't need to. The mystery itself was its own comfort. His small offerings continued. A feather placed on a rock. A marble buried beneath the grass. Once, on a whim, he left a sandwich wrapped in paper. By morning, it was gone. Maybe a raccoon had taken it. Maybe the wind. But Rick grinned to himself and whispered, "You're welcome." The world outside his home felt endless, and yet it was the clouds that gave it shape. They drifted like pages overhead, and he felt each. One carried a secret. He tried drawing them, filling his notebook with sketches. The clouds never looked right on paper, though. They were always too alive, too shifting. Still he kept drawing because the act itself felt like prayer. One evening, he lay out in the field longer than usual. The sky was dimming, stars just beginning to prick the horizon. He whispered a question that had weighed on him for weeks. What am I supposed to do? The answer did not come quickly. The sky stretched silent, the wind barely stirring. Just when his eyes grew heavy, he felt it. Be here. For now that is enough. Tears pricked his eyes, though he couldn't say why. Perhaps it was because no adult had ever told him that before. Everyone spoke of plans, of futures, of things to become. But the sky, the strange, whispering sky, told him only to exist, to be, and somehow that felt like love. After that night, he stopped worrying about fitting in. He stopped wishing the house were larger or that his teachers understood him. He stopped trying to explain himself. Instead, he leaned further into listening. His world became less about what others saw and more about what he alone could feel. He noticed patterns in the way shadows moved across fields. He noticed how raindrops struck the ground like tiny drummers keeping a rhythm. He noticed that sometimes, just before sleep, the clouds would visit him in dreams, turning into vast faces, into shapes of animals, into glowing cities that vanished when he reached for them. It was lonely, yes, but it was also full. One afternoon, a friend from school joined him in the field. The boy chattered endlessly, tossing stones, asking questions Rick barely answered. At one point, Rick said quietly, "Do you hear them?" The other boy frowned. "Hear what?" Rick hesitated. For the first time, he considered trying to explain, but when he looked at his friend's puzzled face, he simply shook his head. Nothing. The moment passed, and he never asked again. Some secrets, he realized, were not meant for everyone. Some secrets lived best when carried quietly. As summer slipped into autumn, the clouds thinned, the air grew sharper, the grass brittle. He worried the whispers might fade with the seasons. But even as the skies cleared, the presence remained. Sometimes in the rustle of leaves, sometimes in the hush before rain, sometimes only in his own chest, like an echo of memory. And so the boy grew a little older, not wiser, not yet, but steadier. He carried the knowing with him like a stone in his pocket, not heavy but grounding. He didn't need proof. He didn't need anyone else to believe. He had the clouds, and the clouds had him. And though he did not know it yet, this simple listening, this soft patience, was the beginning of everything he would become. There are some memories that never leave you, not because they were grand or life-changing, but because they glowed softly like lanterns in the fog. One of Rick's earliest inventions was not a portal nor a machine of power. It was a sandwich, or at least it began that way. He was sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, bored, while his mother chopped vegetables. The house was warm with the smell of bread and onions, the radio buzzing in the background. Rick's restless fingers toyed with scraps, a broken toy car, a bent paperclip, a magnet he'd pried loose from the fridge. He wasn't trying to invent anything. He was only fiddling, but fiddling in his hands often grew into something more. He stacked the scraps together, balanced them in odd ways, then placed a slice of bread on top as if crowning his little tower. His mother laughed when she saw it. "That's quite a sandwich, Ricky." He grinned, but there was seriousness in his eyes. "It's not just a sandwich." To her, it looked like clutter. To him, it was a machine, or the beginning of one. He imagined the magnet drawing flavors closer, the paperclip conducting some hidden current of taste. He pressed another slice of bread on top, made a show of flipping a switch that didn't exist, and declared, "It makes food better." His mother chuckled, wiping her hands. "Does it now?" "Let's see." She humored him, biting the corner of the odd creation. Of course it tasted only of bread and metal and nothing remarkable, but Rick leaned forward, waiting. "It tastes different," she said softly, smiling at him. For years afterward, he remembered the way she said it. He knew she lied. He knew it tasted like nothing but bread. But in that moment, she gave him something greater than truth, encouragement. And it was enough to make him keep building. The sandwich trick, as he called it, became his secret experiment. Day after day, he tinkered with scraps, layering them with bread or fruit, convinced that with the right combination, flavors would transform. He imagined a sandwich that could make someone smile when they were sad, or one that could bring back the taste of a memory long forgotten. He failed, of course. Every attempt was clumsy, messy, more play than science. But play was the seed of his curiosity, and failure never stopped him. Each burnt, soggy attempt taught him something invisible: patience, imagination, the joy of making. His father shook his head when he saw the clutter. "Pointless," he muttered, gathering tools to fix something practical instead. But Rick didn't mind. His father was a man of hammers and nails, of things that stayed where you put them. Rick was a boy of shifting clouds, of whispers, of sandwiches that could heal sadness. They were never going to meet in the middle. Sometimes, though, he'd try his tricks on others. A neighbor boy once agreed to taste his creation. The boy chewed, frowned, and said, "It just tastes like bread." Rick didn't argue. He only smiled faintly and thought, "You're not listening the right way," because to Rick, the inventions were never about taste. They were about the possibility of taste, the belief that something ordinary could be coaxed into magic. And isn't that what children do best? Believe that cardboard boxes are castles, that sticks are swords, that sandwiches can be machines. One evening, after yet another failed experiment, Rick carried his odd contraption out into the field. He set it down in the grass, placed 2 slices of bread carefully around it, and whispered upward, "This one's for you." The clouds drifted slowly, shadows folding across the ground. He waited, heart thudding, hoping the sky might take it. When he returned in the morning, the sandwich was gone. Perhaps an animal had found it. Perhaps the wind had carried it away. But to Rick, it was an answer. The clouds had eaten his invention. The whispers had accepted his gift. He walked back home with a smile too wide to hide. For days afterward, he felt lighter, as though he'd shared a secret meal with the universe itself. The sandwich trick never truly worked. It never made food taste better, never healed sadness, never brought back forgotten flavors. But it was the first time Rick realized that making, even silly making, could connect him to something larger. It was not about the machine, it was about the gesture, the offering, the act of saying, "Here, I made this for you." Years later, when he would build machines that bent reality, when he would stand at the edge of worlds and laugh at gods, he would still remember that first sandwich. The useless invention that wasn't useless at all, because it taught him that the heart of invention was not in power, but in love. And perhaps, deep down, he knew. The whispers of the sky didn't care for brilliance. They cared that he was listening. They cared that he was giving back. That night, lying in bed, crumbs still under his fingernails, Rick whispered into the darkness, "Did you like it?" The silence stretched long. Then, faint as breath, he felt it. Yes. And he drifted to sleep smiling, dreaming of sandwiches that could carry laughter across the stars. There was something about mornings in that house, quiet ones especially, that carried a weight of memory. The air would drift with a gentle stillness, as if the walls themselves remembered every laugh, every argument, every whispered thought spoken in the long corridors of time. Rick, though rarely sentimental, often found himself moving through these mornings as though they were fog, a little dazed, a little unsteady, yet strangely comforted by the haze. He sat in the kitchen, not to eat, but to listen. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the chair beneath him, the occasional shuffle of Morty upstairs. There were days when Rick's inventions could bend galaxies, when equations unfolded in his head like symphonies, but mornings like this reminded him that the true symphonies were quieter. They were the soft patterns of routine, the way the sun spilled across a wooden table, the way a silence could become a kind of companion. Rick reached for his mug, though the coffee inside had long since gone cold. He didn't drink it for the taste, he didn't drink it to stay awake. He drank it as though he were borrowing its warmth, as if by holding it, he could remind himself that life, strange, reckless, unpredictable life, was still something he could cradle in his hands. Morty appeared, still rubbing his eyes, carrying the grogginess of a dream that lingered like mist. He said nothing at first, only sat across from his grandfather, staring at the way the light cut the room in half. Rick noticed this, always noticing, and let the silence hang, because sometimes silence is what keeps two souls close. Finally, Morty spoke, his voice soft and uncertain. "Grandpa, do you ever think about what it means? Like, all of it? Us? The adventures? The weird stuff that happens?" Rick tilted his head, smirk tugging faintly at his lips. "All the time, kid, but thinking about meaning too much is like staring too long at a black hole. It'll pull you in and you won't find your way back." He paused, then added, almost like a secret. "That's why you look for the little meanings, not the big ones, the way someone laughs, the way you feel safe in a room. That's enough to keep you from falling." Morty absorbed this quietly, nodding, though his young mind wanted to press further. But he felt the softness in Rick's tone and decided to let it rest. Some answers were better left like seeds, planted, left alone, waiting for the day they'd bloom. The morning passed slowly, a drifting current of time. Rick tinkered with something small, just scraps of metal bent into shapes, nothing world-breaking. Morty drew little figures in the condensation of the window. They were together, not saying much, and yet everything was being said. The house sighed around them. The world outside stretched lazily. The clock ticked, but neither hurried. And in this quiet something unspoken lived, a reminder that even the most restless souls can find their rest, not in escape, but in presence. And so, as the morning light softened into afternoon, Rick leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, and allowed himself something rare, contentment, not happiness, not triumph, but a quiet exhale as though for once he belonged exactly where he was. The universe could wait. For now, the day was enough. There are nights when memory does not rest, when the past pulls itself across the mind like a tide, dragging shells and fragments of forgotten days onto the shore of the present. Rick knew those nights well. He had lived too many of them, nights when sleep was not an escape, but another form of travel, carrying him back through doorways he had long since closed. That evening, the sky was clear, almost deceptively so. The stars burned like pinpricks of old fire, reminders that every point of light was a place, a story, a memory unfolding somewhere far away. Rick sat outside, his back against the old porch railing, the wood groaning faintly under his weight. Morty had gone to bed, though his restless turning upstairs suggested he was not yet lost to dreams. Rick tilted his flask, letting the liquid trace its way down, though even now the burn no longer held meaning. It wasn't the drink he wanted, it was the ritual. The slow act of lifting, of swallowing, of remembering what it meant to feel small comforts against the vastness of thought. And then the past came to him, not as a storm, but as a whisper. A memory of another night, years ago, when he was not alone. He could almost hear her voice, the one that lingered in the quietest corners of his mind. Not always speaking, not always clear, but present, like an echo that refused to fade. He closed his eyes and the porch melted into memory. He was younger, sharper around the edges, and his hands were steadier as they worked on machines that glowed with impossible light. And she was there, her laugh quick and bright, cutting through the hum of engines. She had believed in him once, not in the way others feared his genius, but in the way someone believes in the quiet humanity beneath it. For a long time, Rick had tried to bury that, to say it didn't matter, to drown it in invention, in escape, in reckless journeys across the stars. But the truth was, it had mattered more than he had ever let himself admit. It still did. The stars above seemed to pulse with his memory, as if listening. Perhaps they always listened. Perhaps the universe itself was nothing more than the collection of every whispered longing, every quiet grief. Rick let the thought settle over him like a blanket, soft and heavy, and for once he did not fight it. A floorboard creaked behind him, pulling him back. Morty, barefoot, stepped onto the porch, his hair a tangle of half-sleep. "You're still up?" he asked, voice low, almost shy. Rick smirked without opening his eyes. "Yeah, kid, some nights are louder than others." Morty sat beside him, knees pulled to his chest, the two of them looking out at the night together. After a moment, Morty spoke again. "Do you ever miss people? Like, really miss them?" Rick's answer took a while. When it came, it was softer than Morty expected. "Every damn day, Morty. But missing people means they mattered, means they're still with you, in a way. The trick is to carry them without letting them weigh you down." Morty nodded, not entirely understanding, but sensing the truth in it. The two of them stayed there, silent, staring at the stars as if they were both searching for the same face in the endless night. And in that silence, in that shared stillness, Rick felt something he hadn't in a long while. Not peace, not closure, but a kind of gentleness. As though the universe itself, with all its forgotten gods and endless shadows, had leaned close just to remind him, "You are not entirely alone." The night deepened. The stars hummed their quiet songs, and Rick, for once, allowed himself to listen. Dreams have their own gravity. They pull us into places we cannot walk while awake, into rooms built of memory, into landscapes carved from longing and fear. Rick did not often admit to dreaming. He dismissed it as the brain's static, noise without meaning. But tonight, he could not deny that something larger had opened its gates to him. The stars above seemed to lean closer as he drifted into sleep, and when his eyes closed, he found himself standing on a shore that stretched farther than sight. The sand was black, not of earth, but of ash, each grain humming faintly as though alive. The ocean before him did not move with waves, it pulsed as though it were breathing. Each rise and fall exhaled whispers in languages he half remembered from old, forbidden books. Rick lit a cigarette out of habit, though the flame flickered without heat. "Figures," he muttered to himself. "Not even my subconscious lets me relax." And then he saw them. Shapes rising from the horizon, not gods in the way Morty might have imagined, not with crowns or halos or thunder in their hands. These were older things, less defined. Their forms shifted as he looked at them, vast shadows with eyes like dying suns, torsos unraveling into constellations, voices that spoke not in words but in the weight of silence. They were the forgotten. Not forgotten because they had never mattered, but because time itself had buried them beneath newer stories, newer names, newer powers. Rick understood them in an instant, because he, too, had known what it meant to be essential once, and then discarded as though the universe had moved on without you. One of the beings lowered its gaze, its presence pressing into him like the ocean itself. He felt its question rather than heard it. "Why have you come here, mortal, who defies endings?" Rick exhaled smoke that vanished before it left his lips. Didn't come here on purpose, just wandered too far into my own head, I guess. You know how it goes." The silence deepened, but Rick felt something beneath it. Amusement, perhaps, or recognition. Another voice, colder, slipped into him. "You seek what you deny. You crave remembrance even as you drown it." He almost laughed. Almost. "Yeah, well, join the club. Everyone's got ghosts." The shadows shifted, their vastness shimmering like broken glass. One leaned closer still, and with its nearness came visions, flashes of his daughter as a child, the laughter he once shared, the faces he had lost by his own hand, or by the cruel mechanics of chance. They flooded him, merciless in their honesty. For a moment, Rick thought he might break, but instead he straightened, even in the dream. "You think you're showing me something I don't know? You think I don't already carry this?" His voice cracked but held. "I don't need gods to remind me of my mistakes. I live in them every day." See, vast silence rippled again. This time it was not accusation, but something closer to respect. "Then you are like us," the beings whispered together, their voices a tide, pulling him into their resonance, forgotten but not gone, wounded but enduring, alone but endless. Rick's breath caught, his chest tightening as though the weight of their truth pressed into him. He looked at them, these shifting remnants of what had once been divine, and he felt a strange kinship. Perhaps it was pity, or perhaps it was recognition of himself in their unraveling forms. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Guess we're not so different." The ocean pulsed again, softer this time. The shadows receded, but their presence lingered, woven into his veins like a melody he would never forget. When Rick finally woke, the dawn was bleeding pale light across the horizon. He sat up slowly, the taste of smoke still clinging to him, though he had never lit a cigarette. Morty was still asleep inside. The house was still. But the memory of the dream stayed heavy in him, not as a burden, but as a reminder. The forgotten gods had not demanded worship. They had not cursed him. They had only shown him what he already carried, and in doing so, they had given him something he had never expected. A mirror. And for once, Rick did not turn away from his reflection. Morning crept into the world slowly, a pale light sliding across the horizon as though hesitant to disturb the silence. Rick sat at the table with a half-finished flask of something too strong for dawn. His hands trembled faintly, not from drink, but from what lingered in his chest, the echo of voices that should have been impossible. Dreams were supposed to fade with sunlight. They dissolved, flimsy as mist, leaving only scraps of feeling behind. But this one clung to him. Every time he blinked, he saw the pulse of that black ocean. Every time he exhaled, he swore he heard the shadows whisper in languages his bones recognized, but his mind could not place. "Just a dream," he muttered, though the words rang hollow. Outside, birds stirred in the trees. Morty shuffled in with sleep still glued to his eyes, rubbing them with the back of his hand. You're up early," he said, voice cracked with drowsiness. "Didn't think you even knew morning existed." Rick didn't answer at first. He only stared at the boy as though weighing something unspoken. Finally, he shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Morty poured himself cereal, the mundane crunch of it almost obscene against the weight Rick carried. "You okay?" Morty asked carefully. Rick looked away. He couldn't tell him, not yet. How could he explain that he had stood before gods older than stars, and they had not destroyed him, but recognized him? Morty would look at him with those wide, frightened eyes, caught between awe and terror. Rick didn't want that, not from him. Instead, Rick stood abruptly, snatching his flask from the table.
Come on, we're going out. What? It's like 7 in the morning. Yeah, well, time's a construct, Morty. Strap in. Within the hour, the portal gun hummed to life. Its light painted the garage in shifting greens, and Morty groaned as he dragged himself reluctantly into adventure. Rick wasn't chasing treasure or science this time, though. He was chasing confirmation. He had to know if what he'd seen was dream stuff, or if the universe itself had peeled back a curtain to show him its forgotten marrow. They stepped through, and the air on the other side was heavy, dense, as though pressing down on their lungs. The sky was grey-black, smeared with faint streaks of violet lightning. Rick led the way across jagged ground, his boots crunching over stone that seemed almost burned. Rick, the place doesn't look safe. Relax. Unsafe's where the answers are. The further they walked, the more the land seemed to hum. Low, resonant, like the sound of his dream. Rick paused, heart thudding. You hear that? Morty frowned. No, just wind. Of course, Morty couldn't hear it. It was for Rick alone. They reached a ravine, its depths bottomless, breathing faint mist into the air. Rick stood at its edge, staring down into the nothing. He felt it again, the pull, the recognition, the sense of something vast just beneath the skin of reality. Morty tugged at his sleeve nervously. We should, go home now. I don't like this. Rick didn't answer. He crouched, placing his hand against the stone. It vibrated under his palm, subtle but undeniable. He closed his eyes. For a moment he thought he might fall in, not physically but inward, into that place where the dream had led him. And then faintly, so faintly he almost dismissed it, came the whisper. You return. Rick's eyes snapped open. His pulse raced. He looked at Morty, who was backing away, oblivious. It hadn't been a dream. The realization chilled him, but it also ignited something. Not fear, not yet, but a curiosity that bordered on hunger. If gods forgotten by time still breathed beneath the cracks of existence, then what else waited for him there? Knowledge? Power? Or something worse? Something that would tether him forever? The ground pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Rick stood tall, pulling Morty back from the ravine. We're done here. What, that's it? We came all this way and... Shut up, Morty. Some doors you don't open all the way on the first try. Morty groaned, but followed. Rick's expression, however, was unreadable. He knew now the dream had not lied. The gods were real. And if they had spoken once, they would speak again. Back through the portal, back into the safety of their messy garage, Rick's hand trembled around the portal gun. Not from weakness, but from anticipation. He poured himself another drink and swallowed it in one motion. The forgotten had called him kin. And for the first time
in years, Rick Sanchez wondered, not in despair, but in restless wonder, what he might yet become. The days that followed were quieter than Rick expected. The portals, the shadowed ravines, and the murmurs of the forgotten gods lingered at the edge of his mind, like embers refusing to die. Yet outwardly he moved as he always did, tinkering, fixing, and sometimes yelling at Morty for no reason at all, though this time there was less sharpness in the bark. He was patient now, tempered by knowledge he couldn't explain, tempered by something old and persistent that whispered just beyond hearing. Morty noticed. Of course he noticed. There were moments when he caught Rick staring at nothing, lips moving slightly as though he were repeating a conversation from a place no one else could reach. Morty wanted to ask, but the words never came. There was a space between them that grew silently, and yet it was not distance. It was something else, attention, focus, listening. One afternoon, Rick wandered outside, barefoot, carrying a small device that clinked faintly with every step. Morty followed, curiosity winning over caution. "What is that thing?" he asked, squinting at the sun bouncing off metal. Rick didn't answer immediately. He crouched near the garden, setting the device on the grass. Tiny dials spun, a soft hum escaping into the air. "This," he said finally, "is for listening. You know, really listening." Morty tilted his head. "Like music?" "Worse," Rick replied with a faint grin. "Or better. I don't know yet, but it's for understanding, for hearing the things that normally hide. It's subtle, Morty, so subtle most people miss it." The hum of the device was faint at first, then stronger. Morty pressed closer, half afraid, half entranced. A vibration ran under his fingers, almost like it had a pulse of its own. And then it began to resonate with something deeper, something old. Rick's eyes softened. "There it is, do you feel it? That's the echo of what we saw, the things that linger beyond the edges of ordinary life, the forgotten, the hidden. And they're speaking." Morty's stomach flipped. "You mean the gods?" Rick nodded, adjusting the dials. "Not in your everyday sense. They're fragments, Morty, pieces of power, memory, and attention that the universe misplaced. But they exist. They always existed. They just wait." The garden around them seemed quieter, the air heavier. Leaves rustled, not with wind, but with vibration. The soil itself hummed faintly beneath their feet. Rick's hands moved over the device as though playing an invisible piano, coaxing sounds from silence. Morty took a careful step back. "This feels weird, like we're not supposed to be here." Rick paused, his gaze distant. "You're not wrong. Some doors aren't meant to be opened casually. But you remember what I told you. Some truths don't wait for permission. They wait for those willing to hear." He smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the boy beside him. Morty, though still unsure, stayed. He had learned something crucial about Rick over the years. If Rick was leading, it usually meant he had already measured the risk, had already thought through the impossible. And sometimes following was the only way to understand the things that mattered. Minutes passed, or hours. Time seemed to stretch and twist. Morty couldn't tell. The air vibrated with soft, faintly musical echoes, as though distant voices were brushing against their minds. They were not words, not sounds, not even emotions, but something in between, something alive. Rick leaned back, exhausted but smiling. "That's it, Morty. That's enough for now. They're there. We heard them. That's all anyone can ask for at this stage." Morty exhaled shakily. You're always chasing things, huh?" Rick shrugged, eyes tracing the horizon. "Not chasing. Just listening. Sometimes the universe whispers, and if you stop to hear it, it tells you things you didn't know you needed." Morty said nothing after that, but he watched. He watched Rick, and he watched the garden, and he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't power. It was understanding. A quiet reminder that the world contained layers and that most people lived their lives touching only the surface. That evening, as the sun dipped and bled into the horizon, Rick lit a small lamp and scribbled notes in his notebook. The device rested beside him, humming faintly like a sleeping animal. Morty watched from the doorway, hesitant to interrupt. Rick looked up. "You know, Morty, most people think life is about big gestures, explosions, and loud moments. But it isn't. It's about noticing, about listening, about the small things that echo forever if you let them. Even God, forgotten ones, respect that." Morty nodded quietly. finally understanding in some small way what had drawn him to Rick's strange, tumultuous life. It wasn't adventure, it was attention. And that night, as they slept in the house that felt too small yet safe, the whispers lingered. Not threatening, not overwhelming, just faint reminders that some things, some truths, wait quietly for those willing to sit still long enough to hear them. The next morning, Rick moved through the house with a new kind of quiet purpose. There was a rhythm to his steps, a soft cadence that seemed to pull the air along with him. Morty noticed immediately, not in the way one notices someone shouting or moving frantically, but in the subtler ways, the way Rick paused at the window, tracing a finger along the condensation, the way his hands rested on objects as if listening to their history. Rick didn't speak much that day. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, he set up his instruments, small dials, wires, humming devices that buzzed faintly, almost imperceptibly. He adjusted them, carefully, his hands steady, even when his eyes were wild with thought. Morty hovered nearby, curious but hesitant. "You really think this thing is going to talk to them again?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. Rick glanced at him, half smiling. "Talk isn't quite the right word, Morty. Communication is better. Listening, giving them space, letting them respond on their own terms." Morty frowned. "Yeah, but aren't you scared? I mean, they're gods. Forgotten ones, sure, but still. Aren't you worried?" Rick paused and looked out the window, watching a cloud drift lazily across the sky. "Worried? Sure. But that's not the same as stopping. The universe doesn't wait for comfort. It whispers. Sometimes it yells. And if you want to hear it, you have to be brave enough to bend your own rules." The device finally hummed steadily. Rick leaned over, adjusting a small dial, and the air seemed to thicken around them, like velvet pressing lightly on the skin. He closed his eyes, listening, not to words, but to resonance. The vibrations were subtle at first, just a quiver beneath the tips of his fingers, then stronger, like faint laughter rolling across distant mountains. Morty swallowed. It's really them, isn't it?" Rick nodded, eyes still closed. "Yes. And this time, we're not dreaming. This is real." The room seemed to stretch, the edges of reality thinning. Shadows pulsed softly, just beyond the periphery of sight. Rick adjusted the dial again, and a pattern emerged in the vibration, an ebb and flow like breathing. There was rhythm here, intention. He could feel their presence not as threat but as recognition, an acknowledgement of his existence, of his willingness to listen. He whispered, almost to himself, "I see you." The device responded with a faint pulse, almost like a heartbeat. Rick smiled, a slow, quiet smile. "You hear me too?" Morty's fingers hovered over the edge of the table. Is it going to talk to us? I mean, for real?" Rick shook his head slightly. "Not with words, not yet. They speak in ways our minds aren't trained to catch, but I can feel it, Morty. Every shift, every pulse, every faint vibration is conversation." For a long while, they simply listened. The room became a bubble, suspended between worlds, where the ordinary laws of sound, time, and perception did not fully apply. The hum of the device merged with faint vibrations in the floor, the walls, even their own bodies. Every subtle movement carried meaning, every pause a response. Morty leaned closer, trying to understand. He didn't fully comprehend the intricacies, the subtle exchanges that Rick felt in his bones, but he could feel the quiet majesty of the moment. It wasn't frightening, it wasn't urgent, it was reverent. A reminder that not everything that matters shouts, that some truths exist only in silence, in patience, in presence. Rick opened his eyes and glanced at Morty. "This is how you start," he said softly. "Not by demanding answers, not by trying to prove you're worthy. You just listen. You allow them space, and you learn." The vibrations pulsed one final time, strong enough to brush their minds, then receded, leaving a faint resonance behind like a song remembered but not fully recalled. Rick exhaled slowly, leaning back, hands resting on his knees. "That's enough for today. The rest will wait. Patience matters more than eagerness." Morty nodded, though he still felt the echo of awe in his chest. "I think I get it," he said quietly. "Sort of." Rick smiled faintly, more gently than usual. "Good enough. Sometimes understanding comes slowly, and sometimes it doesn't matter if you understand at all. Feeling it is enough." The afternoon passed in quiet tasks, repairing scraps of machinery, scribbling notes, watching the light shift through the blinds. The world outside went about its ordinary rhythm, unaware that in one quiet house, two humans had touched a fragment of the divine. When night fell, Rick stood by the window staring up at the stars. He thought of the black ocean, of the forgotten gods, of the whispers that lingered just beyond his waking mind. And he realized something he hadn't admitted in a long time. Fear, when balanced with wonder, was not weakness. It was the beginning of learning. Morty joined him silently, watching the same sky. He didn't ask questions this time. He didn't need to. And as the stars blinked faintly as though winking in acknowledgement, Rick felt the quiet reassurance of presence. Not power, not control, but the enduring truth that some things, though forgotten by many, remembered him still. Rick woke that morning with the taste of metal on his tongue and a faint memory of vibration lingering behind his eyes. It wasn't a dream this time. He could feel the pulse in his chest, the echo of yesterday's encounter with the device. Even Morty noticed immediately. "You're kinda quiet today," Morty said, hesitating at the edge of the garage. Is everything okay?" Rick waved him off with a small, distracted smile. "Quiet is fine. Listening is better." The device hummed faintly on the workbench, a soft, steady pulse that seemed almost alive. Rick moved toward it like a conductor to an orchestra, hands hovering over dials, adjusting carefully. Every twist produced a subtle resonance, a whisper of a voice that was never fully comprehensible, but always unmistakably present. Morty watched, unsure whether to be impressed or terrified. You really think they're, paying attention to us?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He had learned over years and countless adventures that the universe often responded in its own rhythm. You didn't demand attention. You listened. You offered presence. And if the universe chose to respond, it did so on its own terms. "Yeah," Rick said finally, his voice low, almost reverent. "They're paying attention, but it's not the kind of attention you're used to. It's subtle, like wind brushing over sand. You feel it more than you hear it, more than you understand it." He adjusted a dial again, and the device pulsed stronger, the vibrations curling through the floor, through the walls, through their bones. Morty flinched slightly. Rick only smiled faintly. "Feeling it?" he asked. Morty nodded slowly, trying to focus on the hum. There was no words, no faces, no clear signal. But something old and immense brushed against him, something patient and eternal, speaking in pulses and silence. Rick leaned back, fingers steepled, absorbing the resonance. "This is how you begin a conversation," he said softly. "Not by asking questions, not by demanding answers. You let them speak in their own way, and you listen. You respect the space they exist in." Morty thought about that for a long moment. So, like giving them room? Rick's grin softened, almost imperceptibly. Exactly, giving them room, giving yourself room. It's rare, but it works. The day drifted past in gentle monotony. Rick adjusted the device here, scribbled notes there, paused now and then to feel the hum reverberate through his fingertips. Morty busied himself nearby, half helping, half playing, yet always aware of the strange gravity that had settled over the garage. By evening, the device pulsed in a rhythm that had become almost familiar, a song half remembered. Rick leaned against the workbench, eyes closed. "They remember me," he whispered to the empty space, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And I remember them." Morty, quiet as always, simply nodded. He didn't fully understand, but he felt it, the weight and warmth of the recognition, the subtle thrill of touching something older than the stars. Night fell, soft and endless. Rick left the device humming in the corner, its pulse fading into the quiet of the house. He climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the residual vibration in his chest. Morty was already asleep, the faint rhythm of his breathing in sync with the subtle echoes of the garage. Rick paused at the doorway, looking down at the boy. "You know, Morty," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's not always about bending reality, or running from danger, or proving you're smarter than everyone else. Sometimes it's just about paying attention." And with that thought, he stepped into his room, letting the quiet of the night wash over him. The hum lingered faintly, not urgent, not demanding, just present, like a heartbeat shared across time and space. As he lay down, Rick realized that the forgotten were no longer distant shadows in his dreams. They were a rhythm beneath his waking life, a soft reminder that some things endure, even when neglected by the world. And that endurance, that quiet patience, was more profound than anything he had ever built. For the first time in a long while, Rick felt a small, steady pulse of contentment. Not joy, not triumph, but something subtler, stronger, connection. The stars outside his window blinked faintly, like distant eyes watching without judgment. And in the quiet, Rick whispered one final thought before sleep claimed him. "I hear you, and I'm still here." The morning was soft, draped in a light that seemed almost tentative, as if the sun were unsure of how much to spill. Rick stood by the window, fingers resting on the sill, listening to the faint hum of the device left running overnight. Its vibration lingered in the air like a forgotten song, barely audible, yet persistent. Morty appeared in the doorway, hair still ruffled from sleep. Hey Rick, you're up early again?" Rick turned, eyes distant but focused. "Early's just a word. Time's a circle, Morty, and some circles are worth following." Morty tilted his head, uncertain. "Following what exactly?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He moved to the workbench, adjusting dials on the humming device with practiced precision. Every turn of a knob, every subtle flick of a switch brought a new resonance, a vibration more distinct, more intentional. He could feel it now, not just in the device, but in the space around him, pulsing faintly beneath the floorboards, brushing against his skin. "They respond," he said finally, voice low and reverent, "not in words, not in ways we can understand completely, but they respond." Morty stepped closer, curiosity outweighing caution. "Respond? How?" Rick held up a hand, gesturing toward the faint pulses. Like a conversation without speaking. A rhythm you feel rather than hear. I'm not forcing them. I'm just giving space, Morty. That's enough. That's all they ever need." He closed his eyes, letting the vibrations guide him. Patterns began to emerge, subtle and fleeting, a language older than time, speaking in tremors, echoes, and the faint warmth of recognition. Rick could feel it brushing against memories he had long tried to bury. A fragment of a laugh, a shadow of loss, the soft pulse of longing that existed in every heart. Morty watched silently. He didn't fully understand, but he felt the weight of something vast settling over them. It wasn't frightening, not quite. It was profound, patient, immense, and gentle all at once. Rick whispered, almost to himself. They notice persistence. They notice patience. They notice the willingness to be present without taking more than you need. The day passed slowly, measured in vibrations and the quiet shift of light through the windows. Rick scribbled notes, sometimes pausing to close his eyes and listen, letting the resonance shape his thoughts rather than the other way around. Morty kept near, asking few questions, sensing that some lessons could only be felt, not explained. By evening, the device pulsed with a deeper rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Rick placed his hand over it and felt warmth, a connection that was not physical, yet undeniable. "They're acknowledging us," he murmured, the words almost sacred in their simplicity. Morty frowned thoughtfully. "So, they're not angry? Or like, trying to trick us?" Rick shook his head. They're curious, patient, waiting for those who notice. Most people walk past without seeing. That's what makes this rare, what makes it meaningful. The night descended softly, carrying the hum of the device into the quiet corners of the house. Rick sat by the window, watching stars blink faintly against the dark sky, each one a reminder of distant possibilities. Morty joined him, leaning against the sill, letting the silence stretch between them comfortably. Rick spoke finally, his voice almost a lullaby. "The world has many layers, Morty. Some you see, some you hear, some you feel in ways you can't explain. And the forgotten, they exist in the spaces most overlooked. But if you pay attention, if you really listen, they reveal themselves slowly." Morty nodded, letting the words settle. Not fully understanding, but understanding enough. Enough to feel the quiet awe, the patient wonder, the soft gravity of something older than the universe itself. Rick closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the window. And if you listen long enough, you realize it's not just them noticing us. It's us noticing them too, and that's enough to matter. Outside, the stars pulsed faintly in rhythm with the device. Rick exhaled slowly, a quiet contentment settling over him, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself the soft comfort of being in the right place, at the right time, paying attention. The morning carried a faint chill, brushing through the garage and curling around the humming device like a whisper. Rick moved with quiet purpose, adjusting dials, turning knobs, listening with an intensity that made the air itself seem to pause. Morty lingered at the doorway, observing, feeling the subtle tension in the room that was neither dangerous nor alarming, but alive. "Rick," Morty began, voice hesitant, "do you ever worry that, we're going too far?" Rick didn't look up immediately. He let the hum resonate in his hands, feeling its vibrations course through the floor and into his chest. "Morty, most people never go far enough. Most people are satisfied with the edges of things. But if you want to understand, really understand, you have to cross thresholds, quietly, carefully, but cross them." Morty swallowed. "Thresholds, like the things we saw before, the gods?" Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it's not just seeing them, it's feeling them, understanding their rhythm, not intruding, not forcing, just existing in a space where they notice you. And if you're careful, they respond." Morty's gaze drifted toward the device. It pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, like a heartbeat too quiet for ordinary ears. Rick moved closer, placing a hand atop it. The vibration shifted subtly under his palm. "They're here," he murmured, eyes closed. They always were, just waiting for someone who would listen long enough to notice. The air grew warmer, almost tangible, as if the forgotten themselves brushed against the edges of reality. Rick adjusted a small dial, coaxing the resonance to a more deliberate rhythm. The vibrations curled upward, brushing against their minds, brushing against memories and shadows Rick had carried for decades. Morty shivered. "It feels like they know us, like they know everything we've ever done." Rick smiled faintly, not unkindly. "They do, Morty, in their own way, but it's not judgment, it's recognition. You feel it because they're not separate from the universe, they're part of the pattern, and you're part of it too." The hum deepened, carrying a subtle pulse that seemed to stretch time itself. Rick leaned closer, eyes half closed. He felt the rhythm not just in his hands, but in his chest, in his thoughts, in the quiet spaces of his mind. The forgotten were patient, immense, eternal, and yet there was warmth in their presence, a gentle acknowledgement of persistence and attention. Morty hesitated, then asked softly, "So, we're not in danger?" Rick shook his head slowly. "Not right now. Danger isn't always about immediate threat. Sometimes it's about comprehension, about whether you can sit still long enough to feel what matters. That's the kind of danger most people miss." The afternoon passed in quiet observation. Rick took notes, moved dials, listened. Morty watched, sometimes helping, sometimes simply breathing in the hum of a universe older than he could imagine. There was no thrill, no panic, no explosions, only resonance, only presence, only the subtle dialogue between beings who existed beyond ordinary comprehension and two humans willing to notice. By evening, the vibrations had slowed to a steady, gentle rhythm. Rick leaned back, closing his eyes, letting the warmth of connection settle over him. "They respond to patience," he said softly, almost as if speaking to the room itself. "They respond to attention, to quiet observation, to respect. And if you give that, Morty, the universe becomes a little more intelligible." Morty nodded quietly. He didn't fully understand, he never would, but he could feel it. And sometimes feeling is enough. Night fell. The stars blinked faintly above, distant yet intimate. The device rested silently on the table, humming a soft, almost musical echo that lingered in the corners of the garage. Rick lay in his bed later, thinking about the forgotten and their subtle presence, and he realized that understanding didn't always require confrontation, power, or control. Sometimes it required only attention, patience, and the willingness to exist quietly alongside something far greater than oneself. And in that quiet, Rick allowed himself a small, rare comfort. The knowledge that even forgotten things remember, even shadows acknowledge, and even the vast, patient silence of the universe can feel like home. The next morning arrived softly, the light pale and hesitant, as if unsure whether the day should begin. Rick moved through the garage with a calm precision, hands hovering over instruments that hummed faintly. Morty lingered nearby, watching the subtle vibrations in the air like someone witnessing a tide move beneath invisible currents. Rick adjusted a small dial, listening closely. The hum shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, as though responding not just to the device, but to the presence of life in the room. He exhaled slowly, a faint smile brushing his lips. "They're closer today, you feel it?" Morty frowned, tilting his head. Closer. How? I mean, I feel stuff, I guess, but... Rick waved him toward the device. Focus on the subtle pulse, Morty. Not the words, not the shapes, not the things that scream for attention. Feel the quiet, the attention they give without demanding it. That's the connection. As Morty leaned in, the faint vibration became more pronounced, brushing against the edges of perception like a half-remembered dream. It was not threatening. It was not urgent. It was deliberate, slow, patient. A heartbeat shared across space, across time, across comprehension. Rick closed his eyes, letting the resonance flow into him. They're not just here in the device, he murmured. They're in the world now, Morty. Subtle, gentle, shifting things without us noticing. The shadows of clouds, the pause in a bird's song, the way the wind brushes your cheek. It's all them. Morty shivered. So, they're everywhere? Rick nodded slowly. In a way. Not overwhelming, not forcing, just present, listening, watching, reminding us that some things endure even when forgotten. He adjusted the device again, coaxing a rhythm from the hum that matched the subtle shifts in the room. The light from the window flickered in gentle waves, the shadows dancing faintly on the walls. Morty watched, sensing the magnitude without understanding it. Rick continued, voice soft, almost a lullaby. You see, Morty, most people live their lives missing the quiet currents. The things that persist beneath the noise, beneath the obvious, beneath the urgent. And these forgotten ones, they are the currents we never learned to notice. The day drifted by with gentle monotony. Rick recorded observations, adjusted the device, and occasionally paused to simply breathe in the subtle hum that had become part of their environment. Morty kept near, quiet now, learning through presence rather than explanation. By evening, Rick stepped back from the device, letting it pulse faintly on its own. The vibrations in the room had softened, blending seamlessly with the ordinary noises of the house. He turned to Morty with a rare softness in his gaze. Sometimes, he said, the most important things are the ones you don't chase. You don't demand answers. You don't bend reality to your will. You just notice. And if you listen long enough, the universe responds on its own. Morty nodded, feeling the truth of the words in his chest. It was not excitement, not fear, not triumph. It was reverence, quiet understanding, and the subtle awe of touching something older than comprehension itself. Night fell, soft and endless. The stars outside blinked faintly, distant yet intimate. Rick stood by the window, listening to the hum of the device and the gentle stirrings of the world outside, and for the first time in a long while he felt that presence, the forgotten, the eternal, the patient, moving in tandem with his own heartbeat. And in that quiet, he whispered softly to the night, to the unseen currents, to the forgotten themselves, "We notice you." And that is enough. The morning light was a thin veil, spilling through the windows and stretching across the garage in slow, deliberate streaks. Rick moved quietly among his devices, adjusting dials, listening to hums that had become almost like a second heartbeat to him. Morty lingered nearby, hesitant to speak, sensing that this day carried a different weight, a subtle shift in the currents that surrounded them. "You feel it too, right?" Morty asked softly, voice barely above the hum of the device. Rick glanced at him, eyes calm, distant, yet present. "Yeah, Morty, it's different today. The vibrations aren't just in the device, they're in the world itself, the forgotten. They're here. Not in the way you'd expect, not loud, not overwhelming, just existing alongside us." Morty nodded slowly, trying to feel it. There was a subtle rhythm to the air, a pulse in the floorboards, in the shadows, even in the faint bend of light through the garage windows. It wasn't frightening. It was steady, persistent, patient. A quiet acknowledgement of their presence and their willingness to notice. Rick moved closer to the device, hands resting gently on its surface. "See, Morty? You don't force contact. You don't demand understanding. You give attention, patience, and presence. And then slowly, subtly, the world starts to respond." A soft hum pulsed from the device, blending seamlessly with the natural sounds of the garage, the creak of the ceiling, the faint rattle of pipes, the whisper of wind through cracks. Morty watched, feeling the rhythm without fully comprehending it. But comprehension wasn't necessary. Feeling was enough. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the subtle vibrations wash over him. The influence of the forgotten isn't dramatic. It doesn't shout. It's in the pause of a step, the tilt of a shadow, the way a thought lingers just beyond reach. It's everywhere if you pay attention. Morty
shivered slightly, awed by the quiet enormity of it. "So, they're not just here. They're, like, everywhere?" Rick nodded slowly. "In a way, not in a way that controls or forces, but in a way that reminds you that persistence, patience, and attention matter. That even forgotten things endure. That existence itself listens when you notice." They spent the day in quiet observation. Rick adjusted the device, listened, and recorded subtle changes, while Morty learned to attune himself to what couldn't be named. The vibrations became familiar, a gentle rhythm threading through their tasks, their breaths, their thoughts. By evening, the garage seemed to hum with a harmony that was not just mechanical, not just spiritual, but something in between. Rick stepped back, resting his hands on his knees, letting the pulse wash over him. Morty stood beside him, quiet but attentive, feeling the subtle presence in ways words could not capture. Rick spoke softly, almost to himself. Most people walk past the small currents of existence without noticing. But if you do, if you listen, if you feel, you touch something eternal, something older than comprehension. And that's enough to matter. Night fell, heavy and soft. Outside, the stars blinked faintly, as if acknowledging their presence. Rick leaned against the window, listening to the faint hum of the device and the subtle shifts in the world. Morty rested nearby, breathing in quiet harmony with the vibrations. Rick exhaled slowly, letting the gentle rhythm fill the room. We don't always understand, we don't always control, but if we notice, if we listen, we participate. And that's a kind of wisdom that doesn't need words. The hum faded gently into the quiet of the house. Rick lay down later, letting the soft weight of the day settle over him. Morty was already asleep, the faint pulse of the forgotten lingering in the corners of his mind. Rick closed his eyes, feeling the subtle presence of the forgotten, eternal beings brushing against the edges of reality. And he whispered softly, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still out there, moving softly in the world." The morning arrived in soft layers, a gentle wash of pale sunlight spilling across the garage floor. Rick moved through the space slowly, deliberately, the hum of the device now a steady companion in his consciousness. Morty lingered nearby, quiet as ever, sensing that today would be measured not by action, but by presence. Rick adjusted the dials carefully, his fingers brushing over the smooth metal with the familiarity of a musician tracing strings. The vibrations shifted subtly, a rhythm now almost conversational, coaxing the forgotten to respond in ways that transcended language.
They're listening, Morty, Rick said softly, not looking up. Not in words. Not in anything we can fully name. But in rhythm, in vibration, in acknowledgement. That's how you know you've touched something eternal. Morty nodded, feeling the pulse beneath the floorboards, a heartbeat that mirrored his own in strange and faint ways. It's kind of like they're aware of us? Rick's lips curved faintly. Aware, patient, curious, not demanding, not threatening, just present. The day unfolded quietly, the room alive with subtle resonance. Rick scribbled notes, adjusted the device, paused to breathe, to feel, to listen. Morty sat nearby, absorbing the lesson in silence. The world outside seemed muted by comparison, ordinary sounds dulled by the extraordinary hum threading through their space. Rick glanced at Morty, eyes softening. You see, Morty, most people chase big things, explosions, adventures, proof, but some truths, they exist only in stillness, in attention, in willingness to notice the imperceptible. Morty thought about that, letting the words settle. The subtle vibration brushing against his hands felt like a lullaby, a reminder that patience itself could be profound. By afternoon, the hum had developed a faintly melodic quality, resonating with something deep in their minds. Rick leaned forward, closing his eyes, letting the energy wash over him. He felt a connection not just to the forgotten, but to the faint echoes of memory, of presence, of time, stretching and folding around itself. They're teaching us, Morty, Rick murmured. Not instructions, not orders, just awareness, patience, attention. The world listens when you notice, and that's a kind of understanding that lasts. Morty shivered slightly, sensing the immensity without needing to name it. He realized that comprehension wasn't required. Feeling it was enough. Being present was enough. Evening arrived quietly. Rick stepped back from the device, letting the resonance linger gently in the air. The garage seemed to hum in harmony with the faint pulse of the universe outside. Morty watched him, feeling the soft awe of witnessing someone attuned to something far older and subtler than ordinary life. Rick exhaled slowly, hands resting on the workbench. We can't always control, Morty, we can't always understand, but noticing, listening, existing in quiet attention, that matters, that echoes. Night settled over the house and Rick lay in bed, the device humming faintly in the garage like a heartbeat shared across space and time. Morty slept nearby, the rhythm of his breathing synchronized in some small way with the vibrations lingering in the walls, the floor, the air. Rick let himself drift, feeling the persistent, patient presence of the forgotten brushing against reality. Not threatening, not urgent, just there, observing, acknowledging, existing in a space between worlds that could be touched only by quiet attention. And as the night deepened, Rick whispered softly, almost like a lullaby, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still out there, moving softly, patiently, eternally." The morning arrived with a faint golden haze, the kind of light that made dust motes float lazily like tiny stars caught in a sunbeam. Rick moved through the garage with his usual precision, hands brushing over the humming device as if coaxing a song from it. Morty lingered, half curious, half cautious, sensing that today held a different kind of quiet anticipation. Rick's eyes flicked toward him, soft and observant. "Morty, you feel it, don't you? Not just the hum, but the subtle shifts, tiny nudges in the world. The forgotten are playful today." Morty frowned, tilting his head. "Playful? I don't feel anything different. At least, not really." Rick smiled faintly, a small crease forming near his eyes. That's the thing, Morty. You don't notice unless you slow down enough. Watch a shadow stretch a little longer. Hear a faint echo where none should exist. A dust mote flicking against the light like it knows something you don't. It's not big, it's not flashy, it's subtle, but it's there. The device pulsed softly and Rick's hand hovered above it, feeling a rhythm that was almost teasing. He adjusted a dial and the hum responded with a faint quiver, almost like a wink. Morty watched, unsure if he imagined it, but the smile on Rick's face told him otherwise. "They're acknowledging us," Rick whispered, eyes half closed. Not commanding, not instructing, just reminding us they exist in the quiet corners, in the spaces we almost never notice. Morty leaned closer, curiosity edging out hesitation. He reached toward the device and the faint hum shifted, brushing against his fingers like the softest breeze. He shivered, not in fear, but in awe. "So, they're, like, messing with us?" Rick chuckled quietly. "Playful is the right word, Morty. Not mischief, not trickery. Just gentle attention, a reminder that presence matters, that existence matters, that noticing even the tiniest gestures has weight." The day unfolded with subtle shifts. A shadow lingered where none should have been. A beam of light curved slightly, as if guided by some unseen hand. Small, almost imperceptible movements in the dust. The air, the very stillness of the garage, whispered of the forgotten's amusement. Morty watched, learning slowly how to read the delicate pulse of the world around them. Rick adjusted the device again, coaxing the faint hum to a rhythm that matched the subtle movements. He exhaled slowly, letting the resonance flow into him. Most people never notice, Morty. They rush, they demand, they try to control. But those who pause, who listen, who simply exist quietly, they touch something eternal. Morty nodded, feeling the weight of the words, the pulse of the room, the gentle brush of attention that seemed to settle over everything. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent, it was reverent, a soft acknowledgement that even forgotten beings could choose to play, to tease, to remind. Evening came quietly, the light fading to a gentle indigo. Rick stepped back from the device, letting its soft pulse linger, blending with the ordinary hum of the house. Morty watched, feeling the faint thrill of connection, knowing that the subtle presence of the forgotten was not something to control or demand, but to notice, to honor, to exist alongside. Rick exhaled, voice soft, almost a lullaby. "Presence matters more than power, Morty. Attention matters more than comprehension. Sometimes just noticing is enough to change everything." Night deepened, stars blinking faintly outside the window. Rick lay down, letting the hum settle into his bones, into the floorboards, into the quiet spaces between thought and sleep. Morty was already asleep nearby, breathing in rhythm with the faint pulse of the forgotten. Rick whispered one final thought before sleep claimed him. "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still moving softly in the corners of the world, waiting for those who pause long enough to see." The day began in a quiet hush, sunlight spilling through the windows like honey, slow and deliberate. Rick moved through the garage with familiar precision, fingers brushing the humming device, adjusting dials with subtle care. The pulse in the air felt different today, more deliberate, more conscious, almost like it was aware of their attention. Morty lingered near the workbench, hesitant but curious. "Rick, I think I feel them more today, like little nudges, maybe." Rick's eyes softened, a rare trace of warmth appearing. "That's exactly it, Morty. Not big gestures, not words, but nudges, gentle signs that they're here. And the more you notice, the more deliberate it becomes. They respond to attention." The hum shifted under Rick's hands, a subtle vibration that tickled the edges of thought like the faintest brush of a memory. He closed his eyes, letting it flow into him, noticing not just the pulse, but the spaces between the pulses, the silence that spoke more than sound ever could. "They're communicating," Rick said softly, voice almost a lullaby. "Not in words, Morty, not in anything we can directly understand, but they guide, they gesture, they remind. And every time you notice, every time you pause, they become more tangible." Morty stepped closer, cautious. "So, they're like showing us things," Rick nodded. "In a way, not exactly, but they influence subtle things in the world. The way a shadow falls, the pause of a breeze, the flicker of light in an empty room. These are their gestures, and if you pay attention, you start to understand their rhythm." The day passed in quiet observation. Rick adjusted the device, listening, recording small shifts in resonance. Morty followed the subtle changes in the environment, the tilting of light, a dust mote suspended longer than it should, the gentle sway of a loose board as if breathing. Each small anomaly felt deliberate, infused with the patient presence of the forgotten. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed. Most people never notice. They rush, they demand, they want answers, but the answers that matter, they come in patience, in awareness, in willingness to be quiet enough to feel subtle presence. Morty's eyes widened, a soft awe settling over him. It's kind of beautiful, Rick, even if I don't fully understand it." Rick smiled faintly, brushing a hand over the device. "That's the point, Morty. You don't need to fully understand. Feeling it, noticing it, that's enough. The world listens when you pay attention, and the forgotten, they reward that patience." By evening, the hum had settled into a gentle, almost musical rhythm, harmonizing with the ordinary noises of the house. Rick stepped back, letting the device pulse quietly on its own. Morty sat nearby, feeling the subtle interplay between attention and response, the invisible thread connecting them to something older, larger, and infinitely patient. Rick exhaled slowly, voice soft as a whisper. "Some things endure simply because someone notices them. That's how the forgotten persist. That's how we touch eternity, Morty. Not through power, not through mastery, but through presence." Night fell gently, the stars outside blinking softly in the darkness. Rick lay down, letting the faint hum linger in his bones, a lullaby of patience and attention. Morty slept nearby, his breaths synchronized subtly with the vibrations in the garage, feeling the quiet guidance of beings older than comprehension itself. Rick whispered, soft and reverent, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still shaping the quiet world around us, gently, softly, endlessly." The morning was quiet, soft like the whisper of a secret, and the garage felt alive with the subtle pulse of the device. Rick moved slowly among his tools, fingers tracing the familiar dials, adjusting ever so slightly. Morty lingered nearby, watching the vibrations ripple through the air, sensing the gentle shifts in a world that was no longer quite ordinary. "They're influencing us," Morty said quietly, almost in awe. "Like little nudges. I feel different when I'm near them." Rick didn't immediately respond. He placed his hand on the device, letting the faint hum resonate through his chest. "Not different, Morty. You're noticing. You're listening. That's the difference. Most people live unaware. They react. They chase. But when you pay attention, subtle guidance begins to reach you." Morty tilted his head. "Guidance? Like directions?" Rick shook his head slowly. "Not directions, not orders, influence, gentle nudges toward reflection, awareness, patience. You start to feel it in decisions, in thoughts, in quiet choices. And the more you notice, the more obvious it becomes. The hum shifted under Rick's hands, pulsing in rhythm with his
heartbeat. He closed his eyes, sensing the vibrations threading through the room, brushing against the very edges of reality. Subtle shapes of presence seemed to shimmer faintly in the air. A shadow stretching slightly longer than it should, a dust mote suspended in the sunbeam, a loose thread of sound vibrating ever so softly. "They're reminding us, Morty," Rick whispered, voice low. "Not everything matters in noise and chaos. Some things endure because someone pays attention, because someone notices. That's their gift, and that's ours if we choose to accept it." Morty's eyes widened slightly. "So, it's not scary, it's comforting?" Rick nodded, a small, rare smile brushing his lips. "Exactly. Comforting in a strange way. Infinite, patient, quiet. Like being part of something eternal without even trying. You just exist, and they respond." The day passed in measured calm. Rick adjusted dials, listened, and recorded faint changes. Morty began noticing patterns on his own, how the shadows bent, how light flickered, how certain thoughts drifted into his mind gently, suggesting paths he might not have chosen alone. Not commands, just soft suggestions, subtle adjustments, a dialogue without words, an interaction without force. By evening, the hum had become a gentle lull, almost musical, harmonizing with the ordinary creaks and whispers of the house. Rick leaned back, hands resting on the workbench. Morty stood nearby, quiet, sensing the profound patience of something older than comprehension, guiding without demand, shaping without insistence. Rick exhaled slowly, voice soft as a breeze through leaves. "The influence of the forgotten is not in spectacle, Morty. It's in subtlety, in the quiet, in the choices you make when no one is watching, when the world feels ordinary but is actually extraordinary. That's how you connect. That's how you matter." Night arrived gently, the stars blinking softly beyond the window. Rick lay down, letting the hum of the device echo through his bones, a lullaby of subtle guidance. Morty slept beside him, synchronized in small ways to the pulse, feeling the quiet presence of beings older and more patient than the universe itself. Rick whispered softly before sleep claimed him. "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still nudging, guiding, and existing quietly, infinitely, patiently." The morning light spilled softly across the garage, brushing the familiar instruments and the humming device with a gentle warmth. Rick moved among them, fingers tracing dials and switches, listening to the faint pulse that had become a quiet companion. Morty lingered near the doorway, sensing a subtle shift in the air, a presence that seemed aware not only of them, but of their attention, their patience, their very quiet existence. Rick exhaled slowly, voice low and reverent. "Morty, the more you feel it, the more it starts influencing everything. Not in ways that force you or demand, but in ways that shift the edges of thought, the subtle flow of choices. You begin to feel what matters without someone having to tell you." Morty stepped closer, curiosity soft and hesitant. "Like intuition? Or like guidance?" Rick nodded, a faint smile touching the corners of his lips. "A little of both, but softer. Gentler, not instructions, Morty, suggestions whispered in rhythm with the universe. The forgotten are patient, they wait for attention, and then they guide, subtly, in ways you barely notice." The hum of the device pulsed, faint and musical, brushing through the room like a breeze. Rick closed his eyes, letting it flow into him, into his mind,
into the quiet spaces where thought and awareness intertwined. Shadows shifted softly around them, moving in response to vibrations Morty could only feel and not explain. "They're not demanding, they don't force," Rick said, voice almost a lullaby. "They work in the spaces between, in the unnoticed moments, the pauses, the decisions you make when you're quiet enough to hear the rhythm of the world. That's where the influence comes alive." Morty watched, sensing the truth of the words, even if he could not fully name it. The way light tilted across a beam, the faint flicker of a dust mote, the quiet resonance of the hum. It all felt deliberate, a gentle touch on the edges of perception. The day passed slowly. Rick adjusted dials, made small notes, and paused often to simply listen. Morty began to notice subtle patterns in his own thoughts, quiet nudges toward reflection, toward patience, toward understanding. Decisions he would have made quickly now paused, lingered, considered. The influence of the forgotten, delicate and patient, moved softly through him. By evening, the device hummed quietly, harmonizing with the ordinary creaks of the house and the faint murmur of wind outside. Rick stepped back, letting the vibrations settle around them like a gentle cloak. Morty remained near, aware now that the subtle guidance they felt was not external alone. It was also a reflection of their own presence, of their willingness to notice, to listen, to exist quietly. Rick exhaled, voice soft, almost a whisper. "The forgotten don't demand awe, Morty. They don't seek fear or power. They honor patience, attention, and quiet presence. And in return they reveal small truths, tiny nudges that over time shape understanding. That's the gift of noticing." Night arrived gently, stars blinking faintly above. Rick lay down, the hum of the device blending with the quiet rhythm of the house. Morty slept nearby, breathing in harmony with the subtle pulse of the forgotten. Rick felt the soft presence around them, patient, immense, eternal, and allowed a quiet comfort to settle over him. He whispered softly into the night, "We notice you. And that is enough. And somewhere you're still guiding, moving and existing softly, endlessly, patiently." The night was quiet, almost too quiet, and the garage seemed to breathe in rhythm with the faint hum of the device. Rick moved among the tools, hands tracing familiar dials, coaxing a soft vibration that had grown almost musical in its subtlety. Morty lingered nearby, half watching, half listening, feeling the invisible presence threading through the air like a faint breeze. "Rick, do you ever feel like they're influencing us even when we're not paying attention?" Morty asked softly, voice uncertain. Rick paused, hand hovering above the device, and smiled faintly. "Morty, that's exactly it. The forgotten, they don't just exist here in the hum, they're in the spaces beyond. Our thoughts, our dreams, the small pauses in life, they shape quietly, subtly. We notice it only if we're still enough to feel it." Morty swallowed. "So, even when I'm asleep?" Rick's eyes softened. "Especially when you're asleep. The dreams, they're a bridge. They let us sense the currents of influence without trying to control it. And they guide gently, not in a scary way, not in a loud way, just soft, quiet nudges that linger after you wake." That night, Morty dreamed. He walked through a landscape that was familiar, yet impossible. Light curved in ways it shouldn't, shadows stretched like soft ribbons, and the air hummed faintly, echoing a pulse he could feel in his chest. Shapes shimmered on the edges of perception, fleeting and patient. Rick watched from the garage, the device humming in quiet resonance, the soft vibration reaching even into Morty's dream. He closed his eyes, feeling the subtle interplay between attention and influence. "You see, Morty, Presence matters more than action. Listening matters more than understanding. And noticing creates connection. Morty moved through the dreamscape, sensing the gentle guidance of something larger, older, patient. He didn't comprehend it fully, but he felt it in the small nudges, the tilt of a shadow, the pause of a bird, the rhythm of distant water. It was comforting, not alarming, a reminder that even forgotten things endure when someone attends to them. Rick exhaled slowly. The forgotten reward quiet attention, Morty. They shape gently, influence softly, and guide only those who listen. That's their gift, and it's ours if we notice, if we allow ourselves to feel. The dream lingered long after Morty awoke, a faint echo of the hum threading through his thoughts. He turned to Rick, voice soft and uncertain. I think I understand a little more now. Not everything, but the feeling, the presence. Rick nodded, a rare trace of pride in his expression. That's all that matters, Morty. Understanding comes slowly, feeling comes first, awareness first, and the rest unfolds naturally, in time. Night deepened, stars blinking faintly beyond the windows. Rick lay down beside the faint vibration of the device, letting the quiet pulse settle around them. Morty drifted back into light sleep, breathing in rhythm with the subtle influence of the forgotten. Rick whispered softly into the darkness, "We notice you. And that is enough. And somewhere you're still shaping the quiet currents of dreams and life, endlessly, patiently, gently." The morning light stretched lazily across the garage, soft and pale, brushing the edges of tools and the humming device with a gentle warmth. Rick moved among them with quiet precision, adjusting dials, listening to the faint pulse that had become almost a companion in itself. Morty lingered nearby, eyes wide with a new attentiveness, noticing the subtle shifts in the air, the faint tremor in the light, the gentle rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat shared across the room. "Rick, it's like even the world outside is responding," Morty murmured, his voice soft and uncertain. Rick didn't answer immediately. He placed a hand over the device, letting the faint hum vibrate through him. "Exactly, Morty. Not loud, not obvious, not demanding attention. But if you listen, really listen, the world responds. The forgotten, they've begun to extend their presence beyond this room, beyond the hum. They touch ordinary things quietly." Morty tilted his head. "Like small things changing? Or just how we notice them?" Rick nodded slowly. "Both, in a way. A shadow that lingers a fraction longer than it should. A stray beam of light bending differently. A soft pause in the hum of life. You feel these things because you're attentive, and that attention makes them more deliberate. They respond to being noticed." The day moved forward in quiet rhythm. Rick adjusted the device, scribbled notes, paused to breathe, to feel, to listen. Morty followed the subtle cues of the environment, learning to anticipate the gentle influences of the forgotten, the small nudges that seemed almost playful, guiding, comforting. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed, feeling the hum wash over him. Most people rush through life, Morty. They don't notice, they don't pause, but those who do, they touch the currents, they influence in return through awareness, and the forgotten reward that, not with words, not with flash, but with presence, guidance, connection. Morty shivered slightly, awe settling quietly over him. He realized that this quiet attention, this patient observation, was itself a gift. It was an opening to understanding a universe larger and more subtle than he could have imagined. By evening, The hum of the device had taken on a soft, melodic resonance, harmonizing gently with the ordinary noises of the house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind outside, the distant murmur of traffic beyond the city. Rick stepped back, letting the vibration fill the space. Morty remained nearby, silent and attentive, feeling the presence of the forgotten in both the device and the air around them. Rick exhaled, slowly, voice soft as the movement of leaves in a gentle breeze. They don't demand awe, Morty. They don't insist on fear or submission. They honor attention, presence, patience. And if you allow yourself to notice, you begin to understand subtle truths, small currents that shape everything. Night arrived gently, the stars blinking faintly beyond the window. Rick lay down, letting the soft pulse of the device mingle with the quiet rhythm of the house. Morty drifted off nearby, breathing in tandem with the gentle influence of the forgotten, feeling their patient, infinite presence in every shadow, every breath, every flicker of light. Rick whispered softly before sleep claimed him, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still extending your subtle influence, moving gently through the world, endlessly, patiently, quietly." The garage held a quiet reverence that morning, sunlight spilling like soft amber across the floor. Rick moved slowly, deliberately, adjusting dials on the device, feeling the gentle pulse that had become almost a heartbeat shared with the world around him. Morty lingered nearby, quiet, sensing subtle shifts in the air and light, noticing tiny movements that had gone unseen before. "Rick, I feel something different inside me today," Morty said softly, almost afraid to name it. "Like, I'm noticing more, feeling more, even when I'm not looking for it." Rick's eyes softened, a rare tenderness in his expression. "That's exactly it, Morty. Not understanding first, not control, feeling, awareness, attention. That's the beginning. You notice, and slowly, everything begins to respond, even inside you." Morty nodded slowly, realizing he could feel the subtle guidance of the forgotten not just in the garage, but in his own heartbeat, in the gentle rhythm of thought, in the quiet turns of reflection. It wasn't demanding or urgent. It was patient, quiet, insistent, in a way that encouraged stillness rather than action. Rick leaned against the workbench, eyes half closed, letting the hum of the device vibrate softly through him. The forgotten don't shout, Morty. They don't impose. They exist in small nudges, in quiet moments, in the pauses between life's noise. And when you notice, really notice, they reflect it back. They show you parts of yourself you might otherwise miss. Morty shivered slightly, a gentle awe settling over him. "So, it's not just them, it's me too, the noticing. It matters." Rick nodded. "Exactly. Presence matters, awareness matters, even small reflections, tiny awakenings, they ripple out quietly. That's how you connect. That's how you grow. That's how you matter." The day passed in gentle rhythm. Rick adjusted the device, letting it hum softly, a quiet song threading through the room. Morty observed shadows, light, and subtle vibrations with new attentiveness, feeling the patient, infinite presence of the forgotten in every corner. He realized the small, almost imperceptible shifts in his own thoughts and emotions were part of the same gentle guidance, the quiet dance of attention and reflection. By evening, the device hummed a soft, melodic tone that blended with the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind outside, the faint hum of distant city life. Rick stepped back, hands resting gently on the workbench, and let the vibration fill the room. Morty remained near, silent, aware that the influence of the forgotten was both in the world and in themselves. Rick exhaled slowly, voice soft as the brush of leaves in the evening air. Theirs is patience, Morty. Infinite patience. They don't demand understanding. They reward quiet attention, reflection, presence. And if you allow yourself to notice, you start to see yourself, your choices, your heart, in ways that are quietly beautiful. Night settled over the house, stars blinking faintly in the dark. Rick lay down, the device's hum mingling with the gentle rhythm of the house. Morty drifted into sleep nearby, breathing in harmony with the subtle pulse of the forgotten, feeling their quiet, patient, eternal presence in every flicker of light, every shadow, every breath. Rick whispered softly like a gentle lullaby, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still guiding, reflecting, and existing softly, endlessly, patiently." Morning arrived gently, the light folding across the garage like a soft sigh. Rick moved slowly among his tools, fingers brushing the familiar dials, listening to the hum that had grown almost musical in its subtle resonance. Morty lingered nearby, attentive, sensing the delicate shifts in air and shadow, the faint brush of presence that seemed to ripple quietly through the room. "Rick, I think I understand more now," Morty said softly. "It's not just noticing them, it's noticing myself too, my thoughts, my feelings, the things I usually ignore." Rick's eyes softened, rare warmth in the corners. "Exactly, Morty. Awareness of the world of subtle guidance. It always leads back to yourself, the forgotten. They help you see the quiet currents inside you, the small truths you overlook, the tenderness, the care, the connections you carry and sometimes forget." Morty watched shadows shift in ways almost imperceptible, dust motes suspended in the amber light. The hum of the device pulsed, not loudly, not urgently, but like a heartbeat echoing faintly through the garage, threading its quiet rhythm through both their minds. "They're patient, Morty." "Infinite patience," Rick continued, voice soft, almost a lullaby. "They don't demand action, they don't require understanding, they reward attention, reflection, awareness, and when you allow yourself to notice, truly notice, you begin to see the connection that really matter." Morty nodded, a shiver of gentle awe settling over him. He felt a faint warmth in his chest, a quiet swell of understanding, as if noticing the subtle presence of the forgotten also helped him notice the care in those around him, the soft gestures, the unspoken words, the little acts of patience and love that go unseen. The day passed in calm rhythm. Rick adjusted dials, listened, and recorded subtle changes. Morty observed quietly, sensing the way the small vibrations and tiny gestures echoed through the world, threading into his own thoughts and feelings. It was as if the forgotten were teaching him not only to notice them, but to notice life itself with soft reverence. By evening, the garage was filled with gentle resonance, the hum harmonizing with the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant murmur of the city. Rick stepped back, letting the vibration linger, and Morty remained near, silent, sensing the interplay of attention, reflection, and quiet influence threading through both the world and themselves. Rick exhaled slowly, voice soft, almost a whisper. "The forgotten are patient teachers, Morty. They show that noticing, caring, reflecting, these are the things that endure, the quiet truths, the gentle connections, the small acts of presence. They matter more than anything else. They shape life without anyone realizing it." Night fell softly. Stars blinked faintly beyond the windows. Rick lay down, letting the hum settle into the stillness, a gentle lullaby of awareness, patience, and reflection. Morty drifted nearby, breathing in quiet harmony with the subtle influence of the forgotten, sensing the soft presence threading through every shadow, every flicker of light, every breath of air. Rick whispered softly into the night, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still reminding, guiding, and existing gently, endlessly, patiently." The night was quiet, soft as a sigh, and the garage seemed to breathe with the faint hum of the device. Rick moved slowly among the tools, fingers brushing the familiar dials, letting the subtle vibrations wash through him. Morty lay nearby, half awake, half dreaming, aware that the pulse in the air had become almost a companion, an echo of the infinite patience they had learned to notice. "Rick, do you think all of this matters?" Morty asked, voice soft, fragile, as if afraid the answer might break the calm. Rick exhaled slowly, eyes half closed, the faintest warmth in his gaze. "Morty, it matters in ways most people will never understand, not in flash or power or spectacle, but in quiet attention, in noticing, in patience, in connection. That's how life persists. That's how memories endure. That's how we leave traces without ever trying." Morty watched shadows bend softly in the pale light, the hum of the device brushing against thought like a lullaby. "So, even if nobody sees it, it still counts?" Rick nodded, a small smile forming. "Exactly, Morty. That's the beauty of it. The small gestures, the quiet reflection, the patience, they ripple outward in ways invisible, shaping what endures. Even the forgotten, immense, eternal, patient, exist in quiet acknowledgement of those who notice." The day passed in gentle rhythm. Rick adjusted dials once more, listening, pausing, breathing with the hum, feeling the subtle interplay of presence, reflection, and awareness. Morty observed quietly, sensing that their connection to the forgotten and to each other had deepened through patience, attention, and soft reflection. As evening approached, Rick set the device to its final gentle pulse, allowing the resonance to linger through the garage like a quiet memory. Shadows stretched, dust motes floated lazily, and the light seemed to fold softly around them, as if the world itself had settled into patient observation. Rick exhaled, voice soft, almost like a lullaby. "Morty, this is what matters. Not adventures, not explosions, not proof, but noticing, feeling, being present. The world, and everything in it, responds to quiet awareness. That is the legacy we carry. That is how we touch eternity." Morty smiled faintly, a quiet peace settling in him. "I think I understand, Rick. I think I'm noticing now, and it feels good." Night deepened, stars blinked softly outside the window. Rick lay down, letting the hum of the device settle into his bones, a lullaby of patience, attention, and quiet presence. Morty slept nearby, breathing in harmony with the gentle influence of the forgotten, feeling the soft, patient, eternal presence threading through every shadow, every flicker of light, every breath of air. Rick whispered one last thought before drifting fully into sleep. "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still existing, guiding and moving gently through the quiet world, endlessly, patiently, softly. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man." The morning light arrived, diffused, spilling through the garage windows like liquid gold. Rick moved slowly among his tools, fingers brushing the familiar dials and switches, listening to the hum of the device as if it were a heartbeat shared between them and the world itself. Morty lingered near the doorway, noticing tiny shifts, the tilt of a shadow, a dust mote suspended longer than it should, the soft vibration in the air that seemed almost like a whisper. "Rick, do you think they ever tire of being patient?" Morty asked softly, voice fragile, like a leaf in the wind. Rick paused, a faint smile forming at the corners of his lips. "Morty, the forgotten, they exist beyond our measure of time. Patience isn't just a trait for them, it's the essence of their being. They don't tire, they wait, and they notice, always." Morty took a careful step closer, curiosity gentle but persistent. "So, every little thing we notice, every pause we take, matters to them?" Rick's eyes softened, tracing the faint shimmer of light in the garage. "Exactly, Morty. Not in ways that force or demand, but in ways that acknowledge existence. Every quiet breath, every observation, every moment of reflection, it matters, and it shapes us as much as it touches them." The day unfolded slowly. Rick adjusted dials, letting the hum flow through him, blending with the soft ambient noises of the house. Morty began noticing not just the shifts in the world, but in himself. His thoughts, his small impulses, the way quiet patience shaped understanding. He realized the subtle influence of the forgotten had become intertwined with the rhythms of his own heart and mind. Rick exhaled, voice soft, almost a lullaby. "Most people never notice these small things, Morty. They chase, they demand, they want answers, but the answers that matter, they come in reflection, in attention, in patience. And the more you notice, the more you become part of something larger, something infinitely gentle and enduring." By evening, the hum of the device had taken on a calm, melodic resonance. Shadows swayed gently, light bent softly in unexpected ways, and the faint pulse of the forgotten seemed to stretch beyond the garage, threading through the quiet corners of the world. Morty sat nearby, silent, sensing a gentle presence, not just outside, but inside himself. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed, feeling the subtle interplay of attention, reflection, and quiet guidance. "Morty, the forgotten don't just guide, they teach. They show that noticing, caring, reflecting, these are the acts that endure. Small gestures, quiet attention, they ripple across time, unseen, shaping the world and ourselves." Night arrived with a soft hush, stars blinking faintly beyond the windows. Rick lay down, the gentle hum settling into the stillness, a lullaby of presence, awareness, and patience. Morty drifted into sleep nearby, breathing in harmony with the subtle pulse, feeling the quiet, eternal, infinite guidance of the forgotten threading through shadows, light, and air. Rick whispered softly into the darkness, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still existing, reflecting, and guiding gently through the quiet world, endlessly, patiently, softly. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man." The garage was bathed in the gentle gold of morning, the air warm and still, carrying a faint hum that seemed to linger in every corner. Rick moved slowly among his instruments, fingers brushing the familiar dials, listening to the subtle pulse that had become almost a companion. Morty stood nearby, quiet, feeling the gentle rhythm of presence in the air, the invisible hand of the forgotten threading through the spaces around them. "Rick, do you ever wonder what it's like out there for them?" Morty asked softly, eyes tracing the light across the floor. Rick paused, letting the question settle. "Morty, I think about that sometimes, but the forgotten exist beyond our measure of space and time. Their world isn't ours. They don't move in minutes or hours. They move in presence, in attention, in the patience of eternity." Morty nodded slowly. "So, all this noticing, all this attention we give, it's like we're part of them even a little?" Rick's lips curved in a faint smile. Exactly, they notice us noticing them. That's how we touch them, Morty. Not through words, not through action, not through force, but through reflection, through care, through quiet presence. The day unfolded in soft, deliberate rhythm. Rick adjusted the device, letting it hum through the room. Morty observed shadows bending subtly, light flickering in small, unexpected ways, and felt the gentle nudges of influence in his own thoughts, in the quiet corners of his mind. Every observation, every pause, every reflection was a thread connecting them to something vast, patient, and infinitely enduring. Rick exhaled, voice low, almost like a lullaby. Most people rush, Morty. They chase, they demand, they want proof. But the things that endure, the things that really matter, they exist quietly, patiently, without fanfare. And those who notice, those who reflect, they touch eternity. Morty closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the subtle vibrations echo in his chest. It's comforting, Rick, even if I don't understand it all. Rick nodded. You don't need to understand everything. Feeling it, noticing it, that's enough. That's the point. And the more we notice, the more we become part of something infinitely gentle, infinitely patient, infinitely enduring. By evening, the device hummed softly, a melody threading through the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the faint whisper of wind outside, the distant murmur of life beyond their walls. Rick stepped back, letting the hum linger, and Morty remained near, sensing the quiet interplay between attention, reflection, and subtle guidance threading through both themselves and the world around them. Night fell with gentle inevitability. Stars blinked softly beyond the windows. Rick lay down, letting the hum settle into the stillness, a lullaby of patience, reflection, and quiet wisdom. Morty drifted nearby, breathing in time with the subtle pulse of the forgotten, feeling their soft, infinite presence in every shadow, every flicker of light, every breath of air. Rick whispered softly before sleep claimed him, "We notice you." And that is enough. And somewhere you're still existing, guiding and moving gently through the quiet world endlessly, patiently, softly. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man. Morning filtered softly through the garage windows, pale and golden, folding over the familiar tools and the humming device. Rick moved among them, with quiet care, hands brushing dials, listening to the subtle pulse that had become almost like a companion. Morty lingered nearby, sensing the gentle rhythm in the air, feeling the invisible threads of presence weaving through shadows and light. Rick, do you think all the little things we've noticed, all the small reflections, they're a kind of memory? Morty asked softly, voice fragile like the flutter of a leaf. Rick paused, fingers resting lightly on the device. Yes, Morty. Memory doesn't just exist in words or images, it exists in attention, in awareness, in noticing every small gesture, every quiet moment, every act of presence. It becomes a memory not just for us, but for everything connected to us. Even the forgotten notice, even they remember the moments we truly attend to. Morty's eyes widened faintly, a gentle awe settling over him. So, noticing is like leaving a soft trace? Rick nodded slowly. Exactly. Not loud, not forced, just quiet, gentle, patient traces that linger, that ripple out in ways we may never see. That's how connection endures. That's how life endures. That's how love, care, and reflection survive. The day moved forward in soft, deliberate rhythm. Rick adjusted dials, made careful notes, paused to breathe and listen. Morty observed shadows stretching slightly, dust motes floating lazily, and the gentle nudges threading through the air, threading through his own awareness. Every reflection, every quiet attention was a part of the soft memory they were weaving together, with the forgotten, with the world, and with themselves. Rick exhaled slowly, voice low and tender. Most people chase Morty, they hurry, they demand answers, but the things that matter most, memory, reflection, love, presence, they unfold quietly. And those who notice, those who pay attention, they help shape the endurance of everything that matters. By evening, the hum of the device had become a soft, melodic lullaby, harmonizing with the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind, the faint hum of distant life. Rick stepped back, letting the resonance linger, while Morty sat nearby, silent, aware that the subtle currents of attention and reflection connected them not only to the forgotten, but to their own hearts. Night arrived gently. Stars blinked softly beyond the window pane. Rick lay down, letting the hum settle into the stillness, a lullaby of patience, awareness, and gentle memory. Morty drifted nearby, breathing in quiet harmony with the subtle pulse, sensing the soft, infinite presence threading through every shadow, every flicker of light, every breath of air. Rick whispered softly before sleep claimed him, "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still existing, remembering and moving gently through the quiet world, endlessly, patiently, softly. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man." The garage was quiet, the morning light pale and soft, stretching across familiar tools, and the humming device like a gentle sigh. Rick moved slowly among them, hands brushing dials, listening to the subtle pulse that had become almost a heartbeat shared with the space around them. Morty lingered nearby, sensing the faint vibrations in the air, noticing the soft sway of shadows and the warm tilt of light. "Rick, do you think we'll ever stop noticing?" Morty asked softly, voice tentative, almost afraid of the answer. Rick paused, eyes half closed, a faint smile curling at the corners of his lips. "Morty, noticing isn't something you stop. It's not a task. It's a presence, a gentle awareness that grows with time. The more you notice, the more connected you are, to the world, to others, to yourself, and to the forgotten. Noticing isn't fleeting. It endures quietly, endlessly, patiently." Morty took a slow breath, feeling the subtle hum threading through the garage and through himself. So, all the small things, all the quiet moments, they matter? Rick nodded slowly, voice soft as the brush of a breeze. Exactly. Every small act of attention, every reflection, every quiet pause, it leaves a ripple. It becomes memory, presence, care. It's gentle, but it persists. That's how life holds on. That's how love lingers. That's how the forgotten honor those who pay attention. The day unfolded gently, rhythmically, with no urgency, no need for action beyond presence. Rick adjusted dials, listened, and breathed with the hum, letting the resonance thread through the air. Morty observed quietly, noticing shadows stretch, light flicker, dust motes drift lazily, sensing the subtle nudges of influence in the pauses of his own thoughts. Every small observation, every gentle reflection became a connection, not loud, not demanding, but patient and enduring. Rick exhaled slowly, voice soft, almost a lullaby. Most people hurry, Morty. They chase, they demand, they want answers. But the things that endure, attention, awareness, presence, reflection, they unfold quietly. And those who notice, they become part of that quiet endurance, leaving traces of care and memory that ripple through the world. By evening, the device hummed a soft melody, blending gently with the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind, the distant hum of life beyond. Rick stepped back, letting the resonance linger in the space. Morty sat nearby, silent, aware that the currents of attention, reflection, and quiet presence connected them not only to the forgotten, but to themselves, to each other, and to the faint, patient threads of the universe. Night arrived softly. Stars blinked faintly outside the windows. Rick lay down, letting the hum settle into stillness, a lullaby of patience, awareness, and gentle presence. Morty drifted nearby, breathing in time with the subtle pulse of the forgotten, feeling their soft, infinite guidance threading through shadows, light, and air. Rick whispered softly, like a quiet song, "We notice you, and that is enough, and somewhere you're still existing, guiding and moving gently through the quiet world, endlessly, patiently, softly. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well." "Everything's going to be okay, man." The night had settled fully, soft and deep, folding over the garage and the humming device like a gentle blanket. Rick moved slowly among the tools one last time, hands brushing familiar dials, listening to the subtle pulse that had become almost a heartbeat in the quiet. Morty lay nearby, half asleep, half dreaming, feeling the soft vibration threading through the air, threading through the space between them, threading through himself. "Rick, will it always be like this?" Morty asked, voice low, tender, unsure if he wanted the answer. Rick paused, eyes soft in the dim light, and smiled faintly. "Morty, it will always be like this for those who notice. The forgotten don't need us to understand. They don't demand awe or fear. They only ask for attention, reflection, presence. And in return, they give guidance, patience, quiet wisdom that lasts beyond words and beyond time." Morty took a slow breath, feeling the subtle hum settle into his chest. "So, all the small things, all the gentle moments, they really matter?" Rick nodded. "Yes, Morty. Every quiet reflection, every pause, every gentle observation leaves a ripple. It becomes memory, connection, care. It lingers unseen, shaping what endures. That's the beauty of noticing. That's the legacy we leave. That's how life persists quietly, softly, endlessly." The day passed like a slow exhale filled with gentle rhythm. Rick adjusted dials, listened, paused to breathe, letting the hum flow and thread through the garage. Morty observed shadows shifting softly, light bending in quiet ways, sensing the subtle nudges of influence in his own thoughts and heart. Every moment of attention became a small act of presence, a gift to themselves, to each other, and to the infinite patience of the forgotten. By evening, the hum of the device had become a soft lullaby, harmonizing with the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind, the distant murmur of life beyond. Rick stepped back, letting the resonance linger, while Morty sat quietly, feeling the quiet currents of presence threading through both the world and their hearts. Night deepened. Stars blinked faintly beyond the windows. Rick lay down, letting the hum settle into the stillness, a lullaby of patience, awareness, reflection, and gentle love. Morty drifted nearby, breathing in harmony with the subtle pulse of the forgotten, feeling their infinite, soft, and eternal guidance in every shadow, every flicker of light, every gentle exhale of the world. Rick whispered softly one last time, like a lullaby spoken directly to the soul. "We notice you, and that is enough. And somewhere you're still existing, reflecting, guiding and moving gently through the quiet world, endlessly, patiently, softly. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man." And with that, The garage held only quiet, the soft hum fading into the night, leaving the gentle rhythm of presence to carry on.